Before there was an America, there was the British Empire. Well, not quite before, but in the early 1600s, the British Empire started colonizing the Americas and would continue to do so for quite some time. So in this video, we're going to look at how the British Empire started, why it started, and the effects that their empire had on the Americas. Okay, let's get to it. So the British Empire started colonizing the Americas in the early 1600s with the founding of Jamestown, Virginia, in 1607. Over the next century and a half, British colonies would expand along the east coast of what is today the United States, as well as parts of Canada and the Caribbean. The British were not the first Europeans to colonize the Americas. That title belongs to the Spanish, who had established colonies in the Caribbean and parts of North and South America in the 1500s. However, by the early 1600s, the Spanish Empire was starting to feel the effects of competition from other European powers, particularly the Dutch, who were encroaching on their colonial holdings in the Caribbean and elsewhere. The British, French, and Dutch were all looking for new sources of wealth and power, and the Americas seemed like a good place to find it. The British colonies in North America were initially established as a way to compete with the Spanish and French for control of the fur trade. The British also sought to establish a base from which they could launch attacks on Spanish shipping and settlements in the Caribbean. As the colonies grew, however, the British began to focus more on agriculture and less on military activity. Tobacco became an important cash crop in Virginia, while sugar plantations were developed in the Caribbean. Struggles with indigenous peoples were a constant problem for the British colonies. From the beginning, the British had to fight a series of wars against the various Native American tribes in order to expand their territory. At the same time, British colonies were also engaged in a broader struggle with the French and Spanish for control of North America. This conflict came to a head in the 7 Years' War, which was fought between 1756 and 1763. The war resulted in the British taking control of Canada from the French, as well as territories east of the Mississippi River from the Spanish. During this time period, the British Empire played a major role in the transatlantic slave trade. Millions of Africans were transported across the Atlantic Ocean to the Americas to work on sugar plantations and other agricultural enterprises. The British were involved in this trade both as buyers and sellers of slaves, as well as shipbuilders and insurers. In addition to agriculture, the British colonies in North America were also engaged in a variety of other economic activities. For example, fishing and whaling were important industries in New England. And as the colonies grew, manufacturing and trade networks also developed. As the colonies grew and developed, they began to take on a unique identity. The vast distances between the colonies and the mother country, as well as the unique geographic and economic conditions in each colony, led to a sense of independence among the colonists. This was further encouraged by the fact that many colonists were not only not British, but came from various other European countries such as Germany, Scotland, Ireland, and Wales. By the 18th century, this growing sense of identity and independence led to the American Revolution, in which the 13 British colonies in North America declared independence and formed their own government. But Britain would retain control over parts of Canada, as well as numerous Caribbean islands, each of which would become an important part of the larger British Empire. And even after the American Revolution, the British would retain control over parts of Canada, as well as numerous Caribbean islands, each of which would become an important part of the larger British Empire. In Canada, the British established a colony at Quebec in 1608, and over the next century and a half, they would expand their control over much of present-day Ontario and Quebec. The British colonies in Canada were largely defined by their struggle to survive in a harsh environment. The colonies were primarily engaged in the fur trade and were constantly at war with the indigenous peoples who lived in the area. In the Caribbean, the British would establish colonies on islands such as Jamaica, Barbados, and Trinidad. These colonies were largely based on agriculture, particularly the production of sugar, which would become a very important part of the transatlantic slave trade. The British Caribbean colonies were also important stopping points for ships traveling between Europe and the Americas. So in short, the British Empire's impact on the Americas was profound. Its colonies would eventually become the dominant political and economic power in the region,